That's a very good point, because that does give these witnesses some cover, right, to come in, share information, but they're making a decision, right, Joe, about how do I approach this? They're stuck between a rock and a hard place.
A lot of strategy here, right? I mean, the White House has made it clear they are not going to cooperate. So whether it's voluntary, whether it's subpoenas, Democrats in the House have to be very careful because they want information. They need information. They're on a tight timeline here. So a lot of this is tactics. And I don't mean that in a nefarious way. I mean, they need to get the information expeditiously and transparently. And so every one of these decisions has an impact.
What does it mean if they're not getting all of the information, obviously, they would like? They're getting some of the information, but for current officials at the State Department, they're getting pushback, so they're not going to have that evidence.
You know, a lot of this really comes down to how much of the quid pro quo portion of this is essential to build an impeachment case, right? The Democrats obviously seem to think it's very important. I question that strategy. I think there's more than enough without it. And the question is, do you want to spend time and energy and also potentially not meet expectations? Because think about what Republicans are saying. All weekend long, what they're saying is their talking points are there's no quid pro quo. We should get to the bottom of it. We need to get to the bottom of it. But if it's not there, you're walking right into their defense. It's going to be no collusion all over again.
And Rachel, there's a source familiar with Gordon Sondland's testimony. He's the former ambassador to the EU who was involved in this string of text messages with diplomats that Kurt Volker, the former Ukraine envoy, gave to Congress. A source familiar with his testimony told the Post that, quote, it was a quid pro quo, but not a corrupt one. What do you make of that?
Yeah, his testimony is going to be particularly interesting because our understanding is that he actually called the president to talk to him one-on-one before he texted back to one of his state colleagues saying this was no quid pro quo. But our understanding is he's going to say he was just told to say that. The president told him to text that to get it in writing, but that he doesn't know if it was true. But also what is interesting with Sondland is that there are these text messages, like you just mentioned, from that turned up a couple of weeks ago, and it shows him saying that they needed some sort of deliverable in order to schedule this head of state meeting with the new Ukrainian president and President Trump. This was something the Ukrainians really wanted and they were pushing for, but he was one of several State Department officials who were saying you can't have that meeting until you make a public commitment to investigating the Bidens. So he called it a deliverable. I mean, some people, Democrats, are going to call it a quid pro quo. But I think the detail that he's going to be able to testify, yes, sure. I mean, he's going to be able to speak to the details of that.
So this idea of this language coming from President Trump that Sondland, we expect, would say, this is what Trump told him to say, how problematic, what are the implications of that?
Joe, I mean, it depends. Was it said in sincerity? It's like, wait, hold on a minute. There's no quid pro quo meant here. Or was it said with a wink, wink? Like, hey, the messaging is no quid pro quo, but only I know in my head, President Trump, what I actually meant by that. So, I mean, Rachel's right. I mean, how this testimony is delivered this week is very important because was it a sincere, let's make the record clear here, or was it a cleanup job like, hey, wait a minute, this got out in front of us here. Let's clean this up quick before it becomes out of hand, which effectively it now has.
Yeah, the texts are very interesting to read. I will say some people might draw a certain conclusion if they read them. You guys, thank you so much. Joe, Rachel, really appreciate it.